Before I start this script, let me tell you something most people never admit out loud. A woman doesn't lose interest because of your looks, your money, or your status. She loses interest because of one thing that reveals everything about you: your confidence, your emotional strength, your self worth. The moment she sees this, the moment she feels it, attraction dies instantly. Let's talk about the number one thing women get turned off by and why so many men do it without even realizing. You can see emotional immaturity in the way a man reacts to discomfort. Instead of addressing conflict with clarity, he becomes passive aggressive, sarcastic, or defensive. He might use silence as a weapon, shutting down communication to punish her, or he might explode over small issues because he doesn't know how to regulate his internal reactions. What women pick up on isn't the outburst itself, but the deeper truth it reveals: a lack of emotional discipline. A man who cannot process his feelings ends up expressing them through extremes: anger instead of honesty, avoidance instead of vulnerability, blame instead of accountability. This kind of behavior forces women to walk on eggshells, never knowing which version of him they're going to get. Over time, this erodes trust, attraction, and the feeling of safety that is essential for emotional and romantic connection. Another sign of emotional immaturity is an inability to take responsibility. Immature men externalize everything. Nothing is ever their fault. If she's upset, she's too sensitive. If he makes a mistake, he denies it, minimizes it, or flips the conversation to highlight her flaws. If she expresses a need, he feels attacked instead of seeing it as an opportunity to understand her better. Women feel instantly turned off when a man refuses to self-reflect because accountability is deeply tied to emotional strength. A responsible man can admit when he's wrong, apologize without excuses, and learn from his actions. An immature man needs to protect his ego at all costs, and that emotional fragility becomes exhausting to deal with. Lack of emotional maturity also shows up as inconsistency. One moment he's sweet and loving, the next he's cold and distant. One day he promises change, the next he repeats the same behavior. Immaturity keeps him stuck in cycles of emotional highs and lows, and women interpret inconsistency as instability. A woman cannot build connection with a man whose emotional state is unpredictable because consistency is the foundation of trust. When a man lacks inner stability, he unknowingly creates chaos around him, and chaos is the fastest way to kill attraction. Emotional maturity is not about suppressing feelings. It's about owning them, communicating them, and managing them with self-awareness. And the absence of these qualities makes a woman lose respect, admiration, and interest without hesitation. Insecure masculinity is one of the strongest and most immediate turnoffs for women because it exposes a man's deepest fears, his unhealed wounds, and his fragile sense of self. A man who is secure in his masculinity doesn't need to announce it, perform it, or prove it. It shows naturally in the way he carries himself, in the steadiness of his presence, and in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who he is. But when a man is insecure, everything becomes a performance: his behavior, his words, his reactions, and women can feel that instantly. Insecure masculinity isn't about lacking muscles, money, or dominance. It's about lacking inner stability. It's the fear of not being enough, the constant comparison with other men, and the belief that masculinity is something external that must be demonstrated rather than something internal that simply exists. This creates a dynamic where the man is always seeking reassurance, validation, or control, and that emotional dependence suffocates attraction. Insecure masculinity often shows up as jealousy and possessiveness. A man who is insecure sees every other man as a threat because he doesn't trust his value. He monitors who she talks to, he overthinks every interaction she has, and he tries to limit her autonomy under the disguise of protectiveness. But women see through that. It's not protection, it's fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being chosen, fear of not being enough. A secure man doesn't panic at the thought of another man being around her because he knows she chooses him for who he is, not for how tightly he can hold on. Insecurity makes a man clingy, needy, and suspicious, and nothing drains feminine attraction faster than feeling like she has to manage his emotions instead of freely sharing her life with him. Another sign of insecure masculinity is overcompensation, bragging, showing off, exaggerating achievements, or trying too hard to appear dominant. A man who is genuinely confident doesn't need applause or approval. His self-worth isn't dependent on how others perceive him. But an insecure man needs to constantly prove himself. He talks loudly about his successes, dismisses others to elevate his ego, or pretends to be unfazed by things that clearly bother him. Women are extremely intuitive. They can sense when a man's confidence is real and when it's a mask. Overperforming signals insecurity, and insecurity signals emotional immaturity. Instead of being impressive, he comes off as exhausting, self-absorbed, or even childish. True masculinity is grounded, not loud. It is felt, not performed. Women are also turned off when insecure masculinity turns into competition. Instead of supporting her ambitions or celebrating her wins, he becomes threatened by them. He may subtly undermine her achievements, dismiss her ideas, or act irritated when she shines. This happens because insecure men tie their value to being superior rather than being stable. If her success makes him feel small, that's not strength. It's insecurity. A secure man is confident enough to stand beside a powerful woman without losing his identity. But an insecure man sees her strength as a spotlight exposing his weaknesses. This creates tension, resentment, and emotional distance in the relationship. And over time, the woman stops feeling connected, attracted, or respected because she realizes she has to shrink herself to protect his ego. Inconsistency is one of the most powerful forms of emotional instability, and it's something women pick up on faster than men realize. It isn't just about missing a text or canceling a plan. It's about unpredictability in your energy, your intentions, and your follow-through. When a man is inconsistent, a woman never knows which version of him she's going to get: the attentive partner or the distracted stranger, the affectionate lover or the distant ghost, the man who promises the world or the one who disappears the moment commitment requires effort. This emotional roller coaster creates confusion, anxiety, and mistrust, and over time it becomes exhausting. A woman can be incredibly patient, but she cannot maintain attraction for a man who forces her to guess how he feels or where she stands. Inconsistency doesn't just make her unsure about you, it makes her doubt herself. And once she reaches that point, she emotionally shuts down. Inconsistency often shows up in communication. One day, he's fully engaged, responding instantly, expressing interest, making her feel like a priority. The next day, he's distant, distracted, and unavailable without explanation. This unpredictable rhythm sends a strong message. His interest fluctuates based on convenience, mood, or circumstance. Women don't need constant attention, but they do need stability. When communication patterns shift abruptly, it creates emotional insecurity because she cannot tell whether he genuinely cares or if she's just an option he entertains when he's bored. These mixed signals weaken trust because consistency is how emotional safety is built. And without emotional safety, connection cannot deepen. A man who cannot maintain steady energy unintentionally teaches her not to rely on him. And once she stops relying on him, attachment fades. Another form of inconsistency appears in effort. In the beginning, he may pursue her intensely, thoughtful messages, meaningful gestures, genuine presence. But once he feels comfortable, he shifts into complacency. The effort that made her feel chosen is suddenly gone, replaced with minimal engagement. Women feel this drop immediately, and it sends a message that he was performing in the beginning rather than showing his authentic self. When effort becomes inconsistent, it signals that he values excitement over commitment, validation over connection, and the chase over the relationship. Attraction doesn't fade because she wants more attention. It fades because she realizes he only shows up when it benefits him. Inconsistency in effort makes her feel unappreciated, undervalued, and ultimately unloved. Inconsistency also shows in emotional expression. A man may imply he wants something serious one moment, then act detached and non-committal the next. He might share vulnerable parts of himself one night, then act emotionally unavailable the following day. This back and forth creates confusion because his words and actions don't align. Women trust patterns, not statements, and when the pattern is unstable, she cannot build a foundation with him. Emotional inconsistency makes her feel like she's building something on shifting sand. Every time she tries to get closer, he pulls away. Every time she steps back, he pulls her in again. This push and pull dynamic damages her self-worth and convinces her that he's either not ready or not genuinely interested. And once she reaches the point where inconsistency feels like emotional whiplash, her attraction doesn't slowly fade. It drops immediately because she realizes she cannot invest in someone who cannot show up in a steady, reliable, and emotionally grounded way. Low standards and lack of self-respect are some of the most unattractive traits in a man because they communicate a fundamental truth a woman cannot unsee. He doesn't value himself. A man who has low standards tolerates behavior that disrespects him, invests in people who don't give anything back, and accepts crumbs while offering loyalty, consistency, and effort. Women don't lose respect because he's kind or generous. They lose respect because he allows himself to be treated in ways he would never want for someone he loves. When a man doesn't have standards, he becomes overly agreeable, excessively available, and easily manipulated. Instead of being a partner, he becomes an emotional sponge, absorbing mistreatment, excuses, and inconsistency just to keep someone close to him. And what many men don't realize is that the moment a woman sees he's willing to abandon his dignity for attention, attraction dissolves instantly because she no longer sees him as an equal. A lack of self-respect also shows up in the way a man communicates his needs, or rather how he avoids communicating them. Men with low standards often fear that expressing what they want will push someone away, so they stay silent to avoid conflict. They think staying quiet makes them easy to love, but in reality, it makes them easy to take advantage of. When a man never says no, he becomes predictable, unchallenging, and uninteresting. Women naturally test boundaries, not maliciously but instinctively, to understand a man's sense of self. If he collapses at the slightest pushback, if he accepts behavior he's uncomfortable with, or if he changes his entire identity to fit what she wants, she loses the ability to respect him. A woman may enjoy the attention he provides, but admiration cannot grow in a space where he doesn't stand up for himself or honor his own limits. Another way low self-respect manifests is in over-accommodating behavior. A man who lacks standards often prioritizes everyone else's needs above his own. He overinvests emotionally, financially, or physically in relationships where the energy is not reciprocated. He convinces himself that giving more will eventually make someone value him, but this only pushes them further away. Why? Because genuine confidence comes from balance, giving and receiving, loving and being loved, supporting and being supported. A man who gives endlessly without expecting respect in return doesn't appear generous. He appears desperate. And desperation is one of the biggest turnoffs because it signals that he believes he doesn't deserve better. Women are attracted to men who choose them, not men who need them to feel worthy. When the attraction dynamic becomes one-sided, it erodes the natural polarity and replaces it with a dynamic of pity, obligation, or emotional exhaustion. Low standards also make a man settle for people, for treatment, and for situations that diminish his growth. He stays in unhealthy relationships because he fears being alone. He accepts minimal effort because he thinks it's the best he can get. He confuses availability with affection and attention with admiration. When a woman sees he's okay with mediocrity, she realizes he's not rooted in purpose, identity, or self-value. A man with no self-respect cannot offer leadership, protection, or emotional safety because he hasn't established those qualities within himself first. Women instinctively pull away from men who shrink themselves to be loved because if he cannot respect himself, she cannot respect him either. Being easily intimidated by a woman's strength is one of the quickest ways to make her lose attraction because it reveals insecurity she cannot ignore. A strong woman, whether emotionally, intellectually, or professionally, does not need a man to match her achievements, but she does need a man who is not threatened by them. When a man becomes uncomfortable with her ambition, confidence, or independence, it signals that his sense of identity is fragile. Instead of seeing her strengths as qualities that enrich the partnership, he interprets them as challenges to his masculinity. He compares himself to her, questions his worth, and becomes preoccupied with whether he measures up. This insecurity manipulates the dynamic of the relationship, turning every conversation into a subtle power struggle instead of a healthy exchange of support and admiration. A woman can immediately sense when her strength makes a man shrink rather than rise, and that emotional retreat creates a barrier she cannot cross. When a man is intimidated by her strength, it often shows up in the way he tries to control or minimize her. He may make dismissive comments, downplay her accomplishments, or respond with sarcasm when she shares something meaningful. These behaviors aren't about arrogance, they're about fear. Fear that her success exposes his lack of drive. Fear that her confidence highlights his uncertainty. Fear that her independence makes him less necessary. Instead of working on himself, the intimidated man tries to dim her light so he can feel brighter. Women see this instantly. She notices when he's uncomfortable with her growth, when he subtly discourages her aspirations, or when he becomes silent and withdrawn in moments where he should be the most supportive. Over time, she begins to realize she has to shrink herself to keep the relationship stable. And that realization kills attraction because no woman wants to be smaller just to keep a man comfortable. This intimidation also shows up in emotional reactions, jealousy, defensiveness, or unnecessary competition. When she excels, he becomes distant instead of proud. When she wins, he feels threatened instead of inspired. When she expresses strong opinions, he argues not to understand her, but to reassert dominance. A woman can feel when a man sees her as a rival instead of a partner, and that shift destroys connection. Relationships thrive on complementing each other's strengths, not competing over them. A secure man sees her ambition as a gift, not a threat. But an intimidated man interprets her power as a reminder of his perceived inadequacy, and these insecurities become emotional weight she is forced to carry. That emotional burden drains her interest because she wants a partner who stands beside her, not one who silently resents her growth. Being intimidated by her strength also reveals a deeper issue, a lack of self-awareness and self-mastery. A man who knows himself doesn't fear a strong woman, he values her. But a man who doubts himself sees her confidence as an attack on his identity. He may misinterpret her independence as rejection, her ambition as competition, or her clarity as criticism. This creates miscommunication and tension because she feels punished for qualities that should be celebrated. Over time, she stops sharing her success, her ideas, or her dreams because she knows they trigger his insecurities. And when a woman feels she must hide parts of herself to keep the peace, the relationship loses emotional intimacy, passion, and respect. Trying too hard to impress is one of the most subtle yet powerful turnoffs for women because it reveals insecurity disguised as confidence. On the surface, it may look like effort, enthusiasm, or charm, but underneath it shows a man who is performing, not presenting his authentic self. Women have an intuitive sense for emotional energy. They know when a man's actions are driven by pressure, fear of rejection, or the need for approval. When a man works overtime to appear desirable, successful, interesting, or perfect, it sends the message that he doesn't believe his natural presence is enough. He's not connecting, he's convincing. And the moment a woman feels he's trying to earn her interest instead of being grounded in his own self-worth, attraction begins to fade because she cannot trust the version of him he's projecting. A man who tries too hard to impress often over-explains, overshares, or exaggerates his achievements. He speaks with the intention of being admired, not understood. He drops hints about his accomplishments, subtly brags about his lifestyle, or repeatedly mentions the qualities he thinks will make him appear high value. But value isn't something you tell people you have. It's something they naturally recognize through your consistency and presence. When he performs, she senses the underlying fear, the fear that who he truly is might not be enough for her. That fear creates an imbalance in the relationship because she feels like she's being put on a pedestal while he lowers himself to reach her approval. Women don't want to be impressed, they want to be understood, seen, and connected with. Trying too hard shifts the dynamic from partnership to performance, and no woman can build genuine attraction in a theatrical environment. This over-effort also shows up through people-pleasing behavior. A man who tries too hard will agree with everything she says, accommodate every preference, and shape himself into whatever version he believes she will like most. At first, she may find it sweet or flattering, but very quickly it becomes disappointing because it reveals that he lacks boundaries, identity, and self-respect. When a man has no friction, no opinion, no standards, no lines he won't cross, he becomes predictable and unchallenging. Women are drawn to men who can think independently, not men who bend at every word. People-pleasing may seem like kindness, but it's actually self-erasure, and nothing kills attraction faster than a man who disappears into the background just to secure her approval. Trying too hard to impress also manifests in physical overperformance, a constant need to show confidence, dominance, or charm through forced behavior. He may laugh louder than necessary, act overly charismatic, or try to project alpha energy in ways that feel unnatural. What he doesn't understand is that true confidence is quiet, grounded, and effortless. A woman can feel when a man's presence is authentic versus when it's constructed. When everything he does feels like a demonstration, she senses tension instead of confidence, pressure instead of ease. Authenticity allows connection. Performance creates distance. A man who tries too hard ends up sabotaging himself because instead of presenting the real version of who he is, he presents the version he thinks women want. And the irony is that women are most attracted to the man who is unapologetically himself, without pretense, without performance, without the exhausting need to impress. At the end of the day, attraction doesn't fade because of surface level flaws. It fades because of the deeper patterns that reveal how a man feels about himself. Emotional immaturity, insecure masculinity, lack of self-respect, feeling threatened by her strength, inconsistency, and trying too hard to impress all point to the same root issue. A man who hasn't built a stable relationship with his own identity. Women aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for emotional safety, authenticity, and a grounded masculine presence they can trust. When a man shows he can regulate his emotions, stand on his own values, appreciate her strength without shrinking, stay consistent, and be genuinely himself without performing, he becomes someone she can connect with on a deeper level. Attraction grows where there is stability, honesty, and self-worth. And every one of these qualities starts within him long before he shares them with anyone else.